Ladies and gentlemen, and honored guests, and my fellow extraordinary honorees, I hope you can imagine that standing here after so many extraordinary speakers, how humbled it is for myself to be standing here, to share with you the privilege and the responsibility of wearing a yellow star on the screen. A yellow star for Simon Wiesenthal, a yellow star for Isaac Stern, and a yellow star for Otto Frank, and the influences that have flowed towards me as gifts. I call them the voices in my head and the voices in my heart. George Steiner, in his remarkable book, A Reader, states, when we attempt to describe the Holocaust, the language breaks. So what intellectual vigor, stamina, determination, yet alone days of agonizing research must Saul Friedlander have mined in order to write his massive tome, The Years of Extermination, 1933 to 1945. I first met Simon Wiesenthal in Vienna in 1988. I visited his office where he gestured to his mass of files on the shelves and said, "Blood turned to ink." Later, over lunch at the Schwarzenberg Hotel, he told me of the liberation by the Americans of Mauthausen concentration camp. He said, all the liberated prisoners had a flag of their home nation, but we did not have a Jewish flag. Some of the prisoners tore up their blue and white striped shirts and somehow fashioned a Jewish flag, which they were to wave for a few precious moments, after which they collapsed in exhaustion, it being their final act. He paused in telling this story to me and openly wept tears with his hand thus. He, in his own grief, helped the rest of us to grieve. Grief is an essential part of healing, and to this day, I do not believe that Europe allowed herself to grieve. I first met the great Elie Wiesel in Berlin, in the wings of a great theater, and as he walked onto the stage to address the Berlin audience, I felt their collective hearts stop, their breath held. These were Elie Wiesel's opening words. My dear young Germans, I know it is very difficult being you. An English poet of the Victorian era took it upon himself to write of forgiveness with, I suspect, a glass of sherry in one hand and a pen in the other. If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each person's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. Let me counter Mr. Longfellow with a simple statement from a young German philosopher. We measure everything by Auschwitz. A voice I listen to repeatedly is Axel von dem Busche. He said, we Germans will move into the 21st century with an indigestible lump of history that must not be forgiven, may never be forgotten, and will never be understood. So, Thomas Keneally leaves a book signing in Beverly Hills and goes in search of a new briefcase. He walks into Poldek Pfefferberg's store in Beverly Hills to purchase one. Poldek, a Schindler survivor. I spent time with Poldek. He was naturally curious and asked Thomas Keneally what he did for a living. "I'm a writer," answered Thomas. And thus began the extraordinary cooperation between Poldek Pfefferberg, Thomas Keneally, Steven Zaillian, and Steven Spielberg. Thomas Keneally, who said, "In my presence, Europe committed suicide in 1933. This list is an absolute good. The list is life. All around its margins lies the gulf. A brilliant couplet by Steven Zaillian from the extraordinary Schindler's List, which I had the privilege to speak as Isaac Stern. And I have had this quoted to me as far afield as the Canary Isles by a young woman with tears in her eyes. Yes, the language breaks. But that unique combination of rage and poetry reached someone, reached millions. I arrived on Spielberg's set one morning in a rage, having defended one of my Israeli colleagues from a violent anti-Semitic attack, a German-speaking Pole who attacked my friend publicly in a bar in a 5-star hotel in Krakow. I told Steven I was in a rage. "We must use it," he said. Yes, the photo of Anne Frank in my pocket did sustain me through that shoot. And in Amsterdam, Miep Gies made me coffee in her Amsterdam apartment, and while we chatted under the beautiful portrait of Anne, she recounted to me how she found the diary, having sheltered the Franks for years. She told the story in the most animated of terms. After the attic had been evacuated by Silberbauer and his men, Miep entered and saw in the chaos the scattered pages on the floor. "Look, look," she said, "there is the diary of Anne." And thus it began. The world heard Anne. Voices in my heart. I loved Miep. I spent time with Jacqueline von Marsen, Anne's best friend at school. Precious, precious hours with her. And what also remains with me is a man who worked with Otto Frank after the war. He stood outside my trailer waiting to meet me, and I left my trailer costumed and made up as Otto Frank, and the man opened his arms and cried, and he said, "There is my friend. There is my friend." And I say to the fellow members of my profession, this is our task. The unspeakably difficult it may seem. When a yellow star appears on the screen, the audience must make that connection, must have that realization. There is my friend. There is my friend. To the members of my profession, the actors, the directors, the writers, producers, let me say this: when your motives are pure, the angels will come. When you walk into that office with your precious manuscript under your arm, your story from those years of extermination, be empowered by this. Think of the millions of lost stories, the silenced stories. Hamlet's last words to Horatio: "And draw thy breath in pain to tell my story." Let me conclude with the words of Elie Wiesel and Simon Wiesenthal. Eli's words. Let us tell tales. All the rest can wait. All the rest must wait. Let us tell tales. That is our primary obligation. Commentaries will have to come later, lest they replace or becloud what they mean to reveal. Let us tell tales so as to remember how vulnerable man is when faced with overwhelming evil. Let us tell tales so as not to allow the executioner to have the last word. The last word belongs to the victims. It is up to the witness to capture it, shape it, transmit it. And now the words of Simon Wiesenthal, who was a dad to me. He said, when I pass on to the other side and meet all those who have perished, I will be able to say, I never forgot you. I thank you for giving me permission to be a witness.